All right, good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? So thank you so much for coming out tonight. This evening, we're very pleased to have you all here for this occasion. My name is Kira Schiller, and I'm part of the Students for Climate Action organization at UBC. And we're very excited to be hosting this event tonight. In case you didn't know, it's actually the second part of a 2-day series of talks with the radio show host and activist David Barsamian on the war on nature and the future of the planet. And so tonight's topic is alternative media and climate action. So it's important before we begin, and actually extremely relevant to our discussions too, for us to recognize that we right now are standing on unceded Coast Salish territory on which the entire city of Vancouver is built. So understanding and having an awareness of our own history, of the impact colonialism and imperialism has had upon shaping our present-day situation, is an integral part of understanding the broader discussions about social justice, historical legacies, climate change, and meaningful action to shape the future. So here, in fact, is one of the first places where we see where alternative media and independent news outlets are so critical for their very ability to give voice to alternative narratives of history and to give recognition to the subverted and the erased. Today, as we are facing unprecedented environmental and humanitarian crises across the globe, public discussions of climate change and policy are abounding. There is a growing coverage of the facts, the dangerous weather patterns that are ravaging nations already, as we saw with Hurricane Joaquin recently, the migrant and refugee crisis that has crashed upon Europe's doorstep, which most media have actually somehow presented as a new crisis, as something without complex historical roots and something that hasn't existed for decades. There are also, of course, the rising sea levels and the food crises and the droughts. And indeed, mainstream media platforms have caught on to the science, and there's a growing recognition, an acknowledgement that something must be done. But I see these stories every day. I'm reminded about the shifting environment, the 2 degrees, the impending dangers. I hear the science. But climate change isn't just a science issue. It's a social issue. It's a political issue. It's an issue of inequality, of exploitation, of political domination, of injustice. It's a story of marginalized communities and vulnerable groups, of power structures and economic systems. There's more than one side to the phenomena that we need to recognize. There's climate change, there's the physical change to the environment, and there's climate justice, which incorporates the social, the economic, and the political. The two are inextricably intertwined with deeply rooted links, but if we don't give a meaningful recognition to each, the latter is submerged beneath the first. The current mainstream media conversations, to me, lack a meaningful discussion of the justice side. There are letters that are being left out of the alphabet and critical components that are missing from the debates. And why? Because these conversations are so much harder. But we need those hard conversations. We need the platforms and the spaces for them to bring meaningful discussions around issues of historical recognition, of equality, of power, of justice, because these shape how we move forward in the face of climate change. Recognizing the invaluable role of local and independent media is the first step in building a community that is able to prioritize the public interest in truth over the corporatization of mainstream media and reporting. We've seen our public media institutions consistently subordinated beneath powerful commercial interests. I know I have. As a young person who was raised listening to the diverse and dynamic programs on the CBC, I've witnessed in the past few years the debilitating effects of the continuous cutting away of the resources and the funds. I've seen sponsored advertising become increasingly mistaken for genuine content, and the power of news dispersion grow increasingly concentrated on a small number of private corporations. And the recent Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is just one tiny example of this. But we have alternatives in the face of this assault. And one is to consciously support independent and local press. Independent media is a platform that provides us with a space, a dignified and honest and open space to address the root causes and the various components of climate change. So tonight, we are pleased to welcome the radio host, the activist and investigative journalist, David Barsamian, and a great panel of Vancouver's leading community news organizations to bring together a meaningful discussion around how we can foster an effective local media movement. It's a chance for all of us here tonight to engage, to learn meaningful tactics that can help our communities cooperate and lead effective action in the face of these crises. Because we need community-led solutions. We need strong and thoughtful values that honor not just the planet, but human lives and social justice and our collective futures. And more than anything, we need the spaces to create these values. So if you'll allow me to please welcome Ali Reza, one of the heads of our Students for Climate Action, to introduce David Barsamian.
Hi, everyone. So I'd just like to begin by explaining why it's so significant to me to introduce somebody like David, because of this idea that I recognize that if you want to control a population, or if anybody ever wants to control you, the first way to do it is to limit your imagination and your hope. Humans have a very weird, unique capability, and it's that you can look around you. Humans will look at the society around them, look at the way they're living, and then they can imagine it completely different, and then make it happen. It's the only species that has ever been able to do this, and it's been doing it over and over again. We're not bound by our circumstance. Every other species is. If you want to control somebody, you get rid of their imagination. During the feudal era, the church and the nobles would tell the peasants that this is how God wanted it. This is how it was meant to be. Don't imagine it any different than this. In America, when they had slaves, they would tell the slaves that we're better than you, we're more human than you. They would teach it in schools. You would have the greatest scientists teach this, and then they would say, yeah, don't imagine it any different, we're just better than you. We said the same to the indigenous population here and the First Nations here as colonizers. You tell the population, we're better than you, don't imagine any difference. It's the way it's supposed to be. It's the same thing that's happening now. You look at a whole region of the world with extreme poverty, and there's people that literally think that the reason why there's poverty is because of some reason of they lack education. They couldn't figure it out. These very weird racist notions that civilization couldn't figure it out, but we could. Let's go teach them democracy. And we see it today in Vancouver in the fact that you have an unbelievable population of young students and citizens that feel like they can't participate, feel like the system is too large for them. How convenient is it for somebody in power for you to think that, oh, the system's too big, you can't imagine a solution? So the best way to control somebody is to say, don't imagine any different, and even if you can, don't have hope. They have too much power. So the best way to do it is to protect your imagination and to protect your hope. And it's people like David that have been able to do that for us, and for me specifically. Because while you start to learn about the world, you get introduced to a lot of cynicism, a lot of people explaining the world around you, and they don't do it in a way with a smile, with a t-shirt that'll make you laugh the same way David does. And the way that Democracy Now! Does it, the way that Ricochet does it, the way that alternative media does it. And this is why alternative media is important, is because they look at the world around us, and they see the world as it is, as dark as it is, and they're able to imagine it differently. So I'd like to just read you guys a small passage that when David was talking to Edward Said, and David brings up a poem that Edward wrote. The title of his book was named after this book, and it shows us how interconnected all of the struggles are, and how interconnected our struggle is with all the struggles of displacement, and all the struggles of people losing their land. And it goes, the earth is closing on us, pushing us through the last passage, and we tear off our limbs to pass through. The earth is squeezing us. I wish we were its wheat so we could die and live again. I wish the earth was our mother so she'd be kind to us. I wish we were pictures on the rocks for our dreams to carry us as mirrors. We saw the faces of those to be killed by the last of us in the last defense of the soul. We cried over their children's feast. We saw the faces of those who throw our children out of the windows of the last space. Our stars will hang up in the mirrors. Where should we go after the last frontiers? Where should the birds fly after the last sky? Where should the plants sleep after the last breath of air? We will write our names with scarlet steam. We will tear off the head of the song to be finished by our flesh. We will die here, here in the last passage. Here and here, our blood will plant its olive tree. And David asks Edward, again, that Darwish couplet. Mahmoud Darwish wrote this poem. Where should we go after the last frontiers? Where should the birds fly after the last sky? And Edward Said replies, yes, exactly. That's the sense of knowing that we seem to be at the last frontier and the very last sky, that there's nothing after this, that we're doomed to perdition, and yet we ask the question, where do we go from here? We want to see another doctor. It's not enough to just be told that we're dead. We want to move on. And it's people like David that have brought together communities of courage, people like Edward Said, people like Noam Chomsky, who have been able to see the world as it is, the way that Edward has, and have been able to push us through with courage. And we need that courage to face climate change. So I'd like to do a little bit more formal description of David's past. He is one of the most tireless and wide-ranging investigative journalists. David Barsamian has altered the independent media landscape, both with his weekly radio show, Alternative Radio, 100.5, Wednesdays at noon. Now it's on its 30th year, and his books with Noam Chomsky, Iqbal Ahmed, Howard Zinn, Tariq Ali, Richard Wolff, Arundhati Roy, Edward Said. His latest books of interviews with Noam Chomsky is Power Systems, which you can pick up one. There's only one copy, so. His best-selling books with Chomsky have been translated into many languages. He lectured on world affairs, the war on nature, imperialism, capitalism, propaganda, the media, the economic crisis, and global rebellions. He is a winner of the Media Education Award, the ASLU's Upton Sinclair Award for Independent Journalism, and the Cultural Freedom Fellowship from the Lannan Foundation. The Institute for Alternative Journalism named him one of its top 10 media heroes. He is the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center. He has collaborated with the world-renowned Kronos Quartet in events in New York, London, Vienna, and elsewhere. It's my great privilege to bring to you David Barsamian.
Thank you. Good evening, Vancouver. Woo! Let's rock tonight. I'm here to celebrate activism and resistance, and we can have fun while we're active and resisting. It shouldn't be like this boring, overly intellectual, the end is near, comrade, doom is upon us. That's a real way to, attract, young people with that kind of a doom and gloom approach. I'd like to thank Ali Reza for that wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, and for having me here, and especially to Missy D for her fabulous music. And art is so important in informing resistance and giving us bouquets and guldasta and flowers. So poetry, music, dance, theater, all of these things, fiction, we need to integrate them in our struggles. I got radicalized at a very young age, partly growing up in the shadow of the 20th century's first genocide, the Armenian genocide, but also by reading Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle, about horrendous conditions in the slaughterhouses of Chicago, where workers were being paid virtually nothing. I got radicalized by reading John Steinbeck's novel, The Grapes of Wrath, to understand what was going on in the 1930s when capitalism had one of its periodic collapses. So art and film, think of Picasso's masterwork, Guernica, that speaks volumes to the cruelty and the barbarism of war, much more so than some 8-volume track about, the evil of militarism. And Kenneth Rexroth is a U.S. Writer, and he said, "Against the ruin of the world, there is only one defense. Against the ruin of the world, there is only one defense, the creative act. And that's what scares them, when we become not just active and resisting and engaged, but also creative, creating new poems and new ways of thinking. Arundhati Roy talks about this quite a bit. She says, you know, another world is possible. We have to imagine that the BS that's out there is not permanent. It is imposed, it is created, it is artificial, and that's a good thing, because it means we can strip it down, we can parse it, we can break it into pieces and create an alternative world. So we're not talking about, you know, the color of your eyes or your hair, that, you know, those kinds of genetic things that we can't change, but we're talking about a system that is created, the capitalist economic system. I don't know if any of you were at Jack Pool Plaza today at noon. A couple of you? It was very inspiring to see, you know, hundreds, several thousands of people turning out to talking about climate change, but also the spirit of community was so inspiring. People coming together. I think, you know, one of the ways that power keeps us in place and keeps us, you know, isolated and atomized and feeling negative, and there's no hope, and why bother, and, you know, the jig is up, and I'm just one person. You know, we've all gone through those, you know, feelings of self-doubt and pessimism. One of the ways they impose that is through isolation, atomization, cutting us off. They don't want us to get together as we were together this afternoon at Jack Pool Plaza, with also hundreds of trade unionists from the CUPE union from all across Canada talking about demanding action on climate change. And it was very instructive, because congratulations, you have ended 10 years of my making bad jokes about Harperistan. But I want to caution you, because I remember this moment in 2008. Barack Obama had mobilized millions of young people, millions, to go door to door, sign petitions, get people to register to vote, you know, calling up the elderly and the infirm. Do you need a ride to the polling place? We'll provide that for you. Tremendous activism, a tremendous upsurge of energy, and there was a moment when real change could have happened in the United States. You know, this very innocuous little country to your south that never bothers anyone and is, you know, innocent of all that it's accused of. And he blew it. He didn't capitalize on that. There is a moment where you can strike, where the iron is hot. And that moment for Canada is right now. Don't wait for Trudeau 6 months from now, or a year or 2 years, to act on important issues in this country. And you know what they are. It's not just TPP, but it's also climate change. It's about stopping the pipelines. It's stopping the power of Kinder Morgan and Enbridge and TransCanada and the oil patch and everything that's going on. The mining industry, which is monstrous in this country, that is contributing so much, not just to global warming and climate change, but to massive human rights violations around the world. So there's a lot to be done here. I don't have to tell you, and your work starts not next week, but tomorrow. So I hope to leave you with some energy and with some thoughts about, you know, how to engage, how to, you know, make a difference. And we can make a difference. Individuals still count. And when individuals come together and form associations, there's solidarity, there's mutual support, there's all kinds of aid. And in most urgently, most acutely, it's overcoming the loneliness that, oh, I'm the only one thinking like this. It's working with other people to affect change, and that's how change happened in the United States when it looked like the African American community was forever going to be in chains and in segregated schools and lunch counters and housing and even bus stations and trains, and even water fountains were segregated. There was white water fountains and water fountains for blacks. That took an enormous effort, and no one thought it would be possible. And it started, very quietly under the surface, people organizing, getting together, and resisting. What Obama failed to do in 2008 and 2009 was to keep the momentum of the energy of all those young people he mobilized. He said, thank you very much, you can go home now. There was no agenda, there was nothing for those young people who had worked so hard to elect him to do. And I think that was a huge strategic mistake. So the time right now is for Trudeau to act. Don't let him off the hook, or get yourself seduced by his charisma. And it's really interesting that they're quite alike, Trudeau and Obama, although Obama doesn't have the pedigree of the Trudeau name that Justin Trudeau has, but they're both young, articulate, eloquent, beautiful family, fairly young children, and a real counterpoint to their predecessors. So in the U.S. we had 8 years of George W. Bush, who could barely finish a sentence in English. Who didn't know how to use adverbs or prepositions or any of those things. And here, and in Canada, 10 years of Stephen Harper, kind of almost a counterpart, where there became a rise of magical thinking, belief, a kind of mystical belief in the capitalist economic system, in militarism. Of course, Canada's reach is not as wide as the United States, because the U.S. spends more money on weapons of mass destruction and has more weapons of mass destruction than practically the whole world combined. So the destructive power of the United States is much greater than Canada's. And you can see that playing out today in Libya, in Yemen, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. Wherever the U.S. has intervened, the consequences have been horrendous for the local populations. So I'm going to hand out a sheet here, which of course I will share with the NSA and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We just need your signature if you'd like to know more about alternative radio. I'd like to keep in touch with you. I'm not going to bombard you with emails, so the next time I come to Vancouver, which I hope will be not before too long, I can let you know, and you can hear about alternative media, which is part of what we're talking here about. Every Wednesday from noon to 1, you can hear alternative radio on CFRO, Co-op Radio. How many of you listen to Co-op Radio? Good. I hope you support it with your not only enthusiasm, but with your dollars as well. It's a membership organization, and I have a special connection with this radio station. When I began alternative radio in the mid-1980s, CFRO was the first station in Canada to carry alternative radio. So we go way back, and I'm very glad to have that relationship with CFRO. But it really depends, again, if it's going to grow and expand and thrive, it depends on individuals, supporting the station. So do what you can for CFRO. There are a couple of representatives of the station right back there. There are program guides out in the hall. Take a look at their programming. It's kind of cutting edge and definitely deserves your support. So I was really glad to be out there on Jack Poole Plaza, because when you get that kind of energy, when you get people together acting and imagining that another world is possible. And as Arundhati Roy says, if I can paraphrase her, she says, maybe the time has come, the walrus said, and maybe this civilization will end too. But when I listen very carefully on a quiet day, I can hear the goddess coming, and another world is possible. So we can imagine a way out of this muck, a way out of this system of media propaganda. And I dare say, they call it higher education in the United States. I call it lower education. I think one of the things I'm blessed with is that I didn't go through that system. I barely graduated from high school, and I quit college after 1 year. So I didn't have to unlearn things that had, other people are indoctrinated with. We have to think about other ways of doing things and what constitutes progress and so-called development. I have some CDs here, a lot of CDs actually, but unfortunately only a couple of books left. This is my 4th talk in 3 days. I started in Abbotsford on Tuesday afternoon. Yesterday was at SFU in Burnaby and UBC out in the main campus, and this evening here. So I'm glad I have only a few books left, but I wish I had more, but there are lots of CDs, and that's how you can support independent, radical, yes, I'm radical, progressive radio. I don't, to cut to the chase, there's no things about, being liberal or slightly this or slightly that. I'm interested in getting points of view out that the corporate controlled media either completely ignore or marginalize or ridicule. As it did for a long time in the United States with Senator Bernie Sanders, who's a progressive candidate for president. They lavished attention on this buffoon, Donald Trump, who's a real estate magnate who made billions of dollars in New York speculating in real estate. And here you had a senator of the United States elected by the people of Vermont. Before that, he was a representative, a congressional representative. Before that, he was a 4-term mayor of the city of Burlington in Vermont. He has a political background, but he was treated as a kind of interloper. You can't take him seriously. Can you take Donald Trump seriously, I ask American audiences? Or Ben Carson? Or Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or any of these so-called candidates out there who are competing for the best hair on the air. So I've got some, I think some inspiring programs for you here. Naomi Klein is a favorite of alternative radio. I've been working with her ever before No Logo came out. I remember interviewing her in Santa Fe and Avi Lewis, her partner, in the 1990s. And we've done a series of programs since. A couple of them are here, transitioning to climate justice and capitalism versus the climate. Because that's essentially what this match is about. It's about this predatory, rapacious, take no prisoners economic system called capitalism versus the climate, versus Mother Nature, versus Pachamama, versus Gaia, versus Matribhumi, versus the earth. All of these things that we hold so precious that give the possibility of life. I mean, we take life for granted. Just, you know your astronomy, you know what's out there. There is this one pale blue dot in the universe, as Carl Sagan called planet Earth, where there is life. And it is so precious. And what are we doing about our little pale blue dot in the universe? We're treating it like a dumpster. We're treating it like an ash can, like a garbage can, to be disposed of like so much waste. And that has got to change, and it has to change very, very quickly. And we can't do that alone. There's another way of how power manipulates and controls us. They're able to give us, little crumbs, little so-called reforms, but really nothing changes. So, I hope you bike as much as you can. I hope you drive fuel-efficient cars. When there's Earth Day, I hope you'll come out and wear some green. I hope you'll, compost your food and recycle your paper and your glass and your aluminum and your cardboard. But all of those things, as laudatory as they are not enough to get this Titanic, because that's what we're on this. If you want to use a metaphor, I think the one to use is the iceberg in front of us. Of course, even that one doesn't work because the ice caps, the polar ice caps are melting. But let's say the iceberg in front of us, and we are the passengers on the ship. And what does the captain do when he sees what's in front of him? He tells the rest of the passengers, just run to the back of the ship, so that, once we hit the iceberg, we won't go under right away. Moving deck chairs on the Titanic is not a solution. Again, it's really interesting to go to literature to understand reality. I think one of the best examples of that is Herman Melville's master novel, Moby Dick. We are the crew of the Pequod. We are doomed. Why are we doomed? Because our captain, Ahab, is a monomaniacal, fixed on killing Moby Dick no matter what. Even though he's warned by Starbuck and other crew members, let's go home. We've got enough whale here. We've done really well. We miss our family. We miss our children. Let's turn around. But by the sheer force of his autocratic and charismatic character, he was able to break everyone on that ship to obey him. Even Starbucks, for whom this dreadful coffee chain is named. So it's really interesting to see the Titanic and the Pequod, and are we passengers on that ship? We know that there's an iceberg out there and we're heading for it. Can we turn the ship around? This is not some distant, 2150, we're talking about, your great-grandchildren are going to be affected. It's about the young people in this audience. Now, I'm not trying to scare you, but I'm just trying to be realistic about what the science is saying in terms of the acceleration of global warming and of climate change and the resulting rise in sea levels, which, do I have to tell you, you're on the Pacific Ocean? The Pacific Ocean itself, according to a New York Times report that was quite well done, incidentally, a couple of days ago, is a very troubled sea. Why is it troubled? Because there's huge amounts of pollution, again, being dumped into the ocean, but also there are these concentrations of plastic all over, pulling all the oxygen out of the ocean. Hence, fish cannot breathe, so fish stocks are being depleted, in many instances are disappearing. So a very serious situation. We are one with the planet. The ocean is not something out there. Yes, it is out there, but we have to be nurturing. We have to be loving and caring. I know those aren't cool words, but we have to bring up that vocabulary and recover the whole notion of nurturing and being stewards of the planet, of taking care of Mother Earth so she can rejuvenate herself, so she can reinvent herself. The constant pounding, the constant extraction, this whole economic system, which is driven by extraction and what is called progress and development, is on a collision course with Mother Nature. And something is going to give, and it's going to give very soon. And therefore, I'm saying, particularly to the young people, we're talking about the next several decades. We're not talking about centuries off in the future. So Vandana Shiva of India is someone I've worked very closely with, and I think she's been to Canada many times. In fact, she was educated in this country at the University of Western Ontario in London. She talks about something called radical compassion. We need to be compassionate, but we also need to be radical. We need to be able to activate our friends and families to engage in reversing all of these deleterious trends that are now absolutely in front of us. I mean, take this, for example. Human beings in the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future that we wish for human society and the plant and animal kingdoms, and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. Fundamental changes are urgent if we are to avoid the collision our present course will bring about. Now, that was a statement issued by 1,700 scientists and over 100 Nobel laureates in 1992, 23 years ago. And virtually nothing has happened of consequence, of significance since then in addressing the issue of climate change. Of course, there are these wonderful climate summits. There's one coming up in Paris. There was one, a year ago in Durban and Rio and Kyoto and Copenhagen and on and on. And these proved to be nothing but PR extravaganzas for our great leaders who are, totally in bed with the corporate sectors in their particular countries. They issue a press release, and a photo is taken, and they're all sipping Chardonnay or Merlot or whatever their wine of the choice is. And then they go home and they proclaim to the world, we are green. We are eco-friendly. We're going to make a difference. And then they go home and it's business as usual because they're enthralled with capital. They're enthralled with the money that capital generates, which feeds their political campaigns and assures that they have, a chateau in the Alps and an apartment in Paris and a penthouse in New York, etc. 23 years later, Chris Hedges, who was actually in Burnaby a few months ago giving a talk, had this to say as soon as I find Chris Hedges' comments. And that's one of these programs I have here, by the way. We are far down the road. We have obliterated 90% of the large fish in the oceans and wiped out half of the mature tropical forests, the lungs of the planet. At this rate, by 2030, only 10% of the Earth's tropical forests will remain. Contaminated water kills 25,000 people, not a year, not a month, not a week, a day. A day. And each year, some 20 million children are impaired by malnutrition. Huge parts of the planet beset with overpopulation, droughts, soil erosion, freak storms, massive crop failures, and rising sea levels will be unfit for human existence. So we're in between 1992, when that statement was issued by 1,700 scientists, and Chris Hedges' comments of just a few months ago given at SFU in Burnaby. And I don't think there should be any reasonable question that climate change is happening, that global warming is happening. I think a lot of people in British Columbia had experienced for the first time the massive forest fires this past year, and the drought. There's drought in Colorado, where I live, in New Mexico, in parts of Texas, Nevada, Utah, parched areas of the earth. In fact, this issue of water, because of rising temperatures, and 2014, mind you, was the hottest year on record. 2014. July of 2015 was the hottest month ever recorded. And everything indicates that 2015 will break the record of the hottest year on record. I think 7 or 8 of the last 10 years has each set a record for heat. These patterns are unmistakable, and they can only be denied willfully by people who are dedicated to one thing and one thing only, and that is making money. That privileges profits over people, that privileges profits over the life of the planet itself. And that's the economic system that will bail out banks and large pharmaceutical corporations and auto corporations, but not individuals, not communities which are suffering and are in need of relief. It's not even capitalism that's being practiced, particularly in the United States, because the corporate sector is heavily dependent on the public to fund research, to fund development. You look at the pharmaceutical sector, look at the biotech sector, look at computers, look at the internet. All of you think that, Bill Gates invented the internet in some garage in Sunnyvale or Palo Alto, working hours and hours? Hardly the case. The internet was paid for by the citizens of the United States with their tax dollars. The same is true with GPS, cell phone technology, all from U.S. taxpayers funding those kinds of things. We have 4 institutes of health in the United States. They are the ones that develop vaccines and medicines and try to develop cures for different diseases. All of that's paid for by citizens, and then mysteriously, I don't know how this happens, in the middle of the night, all of these great inventions and creations somehow find their way into the private sector, and then they, are cheerleading on, saying, look what we've done. They've hardly done anything, and that's the real dirty secret about capitalism, particularly in the United States. It's heavily dependent on the public. And if they should go into the red, then we, the public, bail them out. I mean, it's an amazing kind of situation. Chomsky calls it really existing capitalism. Not the gobbledygook that's taught in economics departments at UBC or Simon Fraser or Harvard and elsewhere, about the invisible hand and the magic of the market and entrepreneurial spirit. Most of that stuff is propaganda. This is a system that heavily depends on a state corporate access and public funding if there is any crisis that occurs. So I don't think there should be any doubt, but there are still people out there, largely because corporate propaganda says that, the jury is still out, scientists don't agree completely, there's conjecture is injected into any discussions of climate change. It could be, some scientists say, that's always a deadly phrase when you hear that, I'm reminded, solidarity for Palestinian human rights. Palestinians say they're mistreated by the Israeli military occupation. Palestinians say that they are suffering human rights violations. Same thing goes on in India. Kashmiris say the Indian army disappears people, or that the Indian army tortures people that it picks up on the street. One of the reasons I'm banned from India, by the way, the world's largest democracy, is because I report on issues like Kashmir. And, unfortunately, it's been going on 5 years. I'm not allowed in the world's largest democracy. I was glad to hear, though, today that there were demonstrations when the Prime Minister of India came to Vancouver, Narendra Modi, who, he is a major criminal who should have been brought to account for massacres of Muslims in Gujarat. Forgive that little aside. I'll be happy to talk to you in detail about that at the end of this meeting. But, headline after headline, intolerable heat may hit the Middle East by the end of the century. This past summer, temperatures in Baghdad exceeded 55 degrees centigrade. 55, 56, 57. In Basra, it was even hotter. In Oman. So there's a huge, increase in that kind of heat. Foreshadowing Paris, failure in Bonn chastised as calamity for the climate. There was just a pre-Paris meeting in Bonn where the great countries could not agree really on anything. Never seen anything like this before, as 2015 set to be the hottest year on record. How climate change is threatening fragile security. You know, you all heard about the Arab Spring, of course, which in some respects has turned into a winter for many of those countries. But climate change had a lot to do with what happened in Egypt and in Syria in particular. In Egypt and in Syria, there's been an extensive drought. Food prices skyrocketed in Egypt, and people came out in the streets. They came out into Tahrir Square, and of course, they were also stimulated by the fact that they'd been living under a US-supported Mubarak dictatorship for 30 years. In Syria, a very serious drought in more than 4 or 5 years. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of Syrian farmers abandoned their lands and went into the cities where very difficult circumstances, did not have work. And this became a kind of kindling for uprising. And we can see this and predict it, and it is being predicted in places like water-stressed countries like Pakistan, which, you would think with the Indus River and the great rivers of the Punjab would have an enormous amount of water. But there is water scarcity there, water scarcity in the Gangetic Basin. I've been to the Himalayas and I've seen the glaciers shrinking, but you don't even have to go to the Himalayas. You can come to, probably in British Columbia, you've seen the glaciers contracting. In Colorado, where I live, in the last 40 years, I've seen with my own eyes how glaciers, when I first got there, were this wide, let's say, and are now this wide. You don't have to be a geologist or a climatologist to understand what's going on. I must say it's good that we have the Pope on our side on this particular issue. He is talking about climate justice, and he's also talking about, excuse me, the capitalist economic system and the inequality and the inequality that is endemic to it. This is in its DNA and its drive for profits. This is not something that developed over a period of time. It is essential to the organism of the capitalist economic system to maximize profits. That's what it's all about. Rhetoric aside about the people and the planet and on green, on the Nature Day, April 22nd, I'll take out full-page ads in the Globe and Mail and tell everyone how much I love the planet. The Earth Day, their practices belie their rhetoric. And, we have what may be actually a criminal action taken by ExxonMobil, which in the late 70s, but in the early 1980s, their scientists already knew that global warming was happening, but they did not report it. They kept that information secret from the public, and this is where there may be criminal liability. They didn't tell their shareholders, the people that buy stock in these corporations. And I was glad, speaking of stocks, I was at UBC last night, and there is a divestment movement there, and I urge you all to get involved in that if you can, because that is something they understand. They, the capitalists, understand this. This is what makes their world go around. And if they start feeling the pinch in their pocket, in their wallet, they'll pay attention and start giving us what we need, which is sustainable, such as wind turbines, such as solar panels. Why is Denmark and China and Germany in the lead in these areas? Canada should be up there, so should the United States and other countries as well. So getting involved in the divestment movement is important. You may have heard that last year there were about 400,000 people demonstrating in New York against these practices, this eco-destructive practices of the corporate system, which was great. And there's going to be another global march, I believe on November 29th. And there's going to be something happening right here in your community in Vancouver. So that was important, what happened. But I think what happened the next day was really significant. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund divested from fossil fuels. Now, you can't miss the symbolism of this. John D. Rockefeller is the godfather of the oil industry. Esso, later Exxon, and now ExxonMobil. So that was hugely significant, and there are moves all over the U.S. and Norway, the government of Norway has divested itself, the university from fossil fuel corporations. The University of California has divested its considerable monies. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars here. We're not talking nickels and dimes. So it can make an impact if it grows. And so people demanding a responsible behavior from corporations, that's one thing, we can demand. But what they hear is when money is slipping away from them and their net profit is reduced. I mean, it sounds like the Pope may be reading Marx and Engels when he's talking about, today everything comes under the laws of competition and the survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. As a consequence, masses of people find themselves excluded and marginalized. The idea that a free market will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusiveness in the world has never, emphasis, has never been confirmed by the facts. That's, part of the propaganda and the magical thinking that the capitalists, with their media and their stranglehold on the media, there's 5 or 6 corporations that control what most Americans see here and read. In Canada, hey, you're beating the United States. Congratulations. The number here is 4 corporations control what most people see here and read. I think a lot of young people have cut through the crap, have been, using the intercept and the new technologies and Facebook and Twitter and all of those things that have come to avoid the corporate media and to avoid being propagandized with their, endless commercials about shampoos and conditioners and your hair is too straight, too curly, too oily, too thin, too thick, whatever. You're not perfect. You've got to change yourself. Go out and buy this product. Vandana Shiva, a great, inspiring Indian woman, as I said, she says the threats to the rights of the earth and to the rights of marginalized communities arise from a worldview that views nature as dead and the poor as disposable. Exploitation of nature and people is leading to severe ecological disruption. And I think here, there was mention of First Nations in the United States, they're called, Native Americans. We can learn from indigenous peoples. They have a different relationship with nature. And I remember my parents growing up in eastern Anatolia, in historical Armenia, talking about trees and rivers and mountains and hilltops with such reverence. They were holy. And here we see a hilltop, or the capitalists see a hilltop, and they wonder if there's any coal under that hill, or if there's any iron ores, any manganese, as there is going on in India, where there's massive destruction of the environment going on, again with a kind of collusion between the capitalist developers and the political class as well. And people ask me, whoa, what gives you hope? People in India give me hope. The most downtrodden and disadvantaged people that don't have, the advantages that we have and the privileges that we have, the Adivasi, the original inhabitants of South Asia, have in many instances, not all, have stopped projects dead in their tracks, have stopped dams from being built, from factories from being built, from their mountains being destroyed, their rivers being polluted. That struggle is going on under the radar in India. And it's, again, Arundhati Roy has written quite a bit about this, and other writers as well, someone who's in the audience here tonight. I won't embarrass her by pointing her out, but yes, we can make a difference. But it happens poco a poco. It happens little by little, step by step, paso a paso. We can do it. It's all about solidarity. It's all about energizing yourselves and believing in that another world is possible. And this book that I just recently did with Chomsky, I think, addresses a couple of these questions. For example, I ask him, what advice would you give to young people? Every night when I come home, he says, and start to answer the day's hundreds of emails, I feel sorry for myself. I get 30 or 40 emails, but he gets hundreds, if not thousands. A fair number are from young people saying, I don't like the way the world is going. I can't stand it, in fact. What should I do? By now, I receive so many of these messages. There's no general answer for everybody. There's no right answer for every person. It depends on who you are, what your concerns are, what your options are, how much you want to devote yourself to it, and what your talents are. But you're probably pretty privileged. Otherwise, you wouldn't be writing me a letter on the internet. That means you have a lot of opportunities, much more than your counterparts in other countries, or even here a generation ago. So there is a legacy that you can use. It's not going to be easy, it never is, but you can make a difference. You just have to find your way. There's no way people can answer for anyone else the question, what should I devote my life to? How should I live? Those are things you just have to work out for yourself. You'll go down many paths, some of them don't work, there will be failures, which you can learn from and then go back and start over in a different direction. It's in your hands. And indeed, it is in your hands. And I want to close with a couple of poems. One of them actually is just a couplet from Wendell Berry, who's a terrific environmental writer in the US. And he says, be joyful even though you've considered all the facts. So, very much like Antonio Gramsci, pessimism of the intellect. Okay, we know what's out there. We see what the corporations are doing. We see what the political class is doing. It looks pretty grim. But then you have optimism of the will. And this isn't some Nietzschean optimism of some Übermensch, right, of a Superman. It is, again, overcoming obstacles, as people did in the United States in various struggles in ending slavery and ending segregation, as people have in Canada as well in various struggles. It all happens poco a poco. W.H. Auden was a great English poet, 20th century. He wrote this actually in a bar on West 52nd Street in New York on the first day of the Second World War. And the name of the poem is September 1st, 1939. Auden, by the way, was not only a great poet, he was a political activist. He went to Spain and fought with the Republicans against the fascists that were lavishly supported by the great democracies, and Hitler and Mussolini as well, the forces of Franco that wanted to overthrow the Spanish Republic. He was there driving an ambulance in the 1930s. Auden says, all I have is a voice to undo the folded lie. Defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies. Yet dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. May I compose like them of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. And again, that fine line between cynicism and skepticism. Go into cynicism, you wallow in quicksand. You can't get out. You become negative. You become the opposite of what you aspire to. But being skeptical, being hopeful, gives you the energy that you can change things. And again, when you form unions with kindred spirits, you can make a difference. Marge Piercy is a wonderful U.S. poet, contemporary. She wrote "The Moon is Always Female." This poem is called "We Give Up Far Too Easily." Why do people get so discouraged about political action? You take vitamin pills and imagine they do something. You don't say, "I'll never wash the dishes," because they'll just get dirty again. We all mumble silly prayers into the air. "Oh, please don't let me miss the plane. Oh, please let him call me back." We never count times our wishes deflate as futile. Inaction certainly will work fine for the overlords who own our work, control our lives, consider us collateral loss in their grand schemes. They only fear masses in motion. A little at a time is the way forward, an unending dance, 2 steps forward and 1.5 back. Sitting on your ass too long just makes you one. We're only what we've tried. Marge Piercy. So on that note, I want to thank you so much for turning out and being here and laughing at some of my silly jokes and frowning at others. But I'm going back to Boulder, Colorado tomorrow morning. You are here. You are in this community. Get activated. Be engaged. Expand the parameters of your knowledge and your activism. And you'll have a good time doing it. And, if the ship is going down, if we are indeed doomed on the Titanic, at least we had a good time and we sang good songs and we danced and we recited poetry. Thank you very much.